Children are more resistant to severe COVID-19 infections compared to adults, and it has something to do with how their immune systems are structured and how they respond to the virus. Welcome back to this channel. Last week, I made a video explaining the role of T cells, and not just antibodies, in the body's battle against COVID 19, including against the Omicron variant. Please watch that video after this one if you haven't done so already. For my second dose of research knowledge, I'd like to share an article from Nature entitled Local and Systemic Responses to SARS-CoV-2 Infection in Children and Adults. This study is by Yoshida et al. And was published last December 22, 2021. This is not a preprint, but instead a peer-reviewed accelerated article preview. As with the last video, we will dissect the abstract line per line and see where it leads us. Based on published studies and a systematic review regarding pediatric COVID cases, it has been established even as early as 2020 that children generally have milder presentations, usually manifesting with fever, dry cough, fatigue, but a lot of them were also asymptomatic rather. An old study from Italy also supports this claim in that child deaths due to COVID has been noticeably lower compared with the adult population. If you also take a look at the CDC data from November of 2021, the pattern is also similar. Now, in this study, Yoshida et al. Wanted to know why children typically present with milder COVID 19 compared to adults. So they recruited 19 children and 18 adults who have COVID 19 infection, classified them as a mix of asymptomatic to severe cases, as well as recruiting 41 healthy children and adults. They then profiled the immune cell portfolio of each of the participants' nose, throat, lungs, and blood using a general strategy of multi-omics. But specifically, they used a technique called single cell RNA sequencing, taking note of the similarities and differences between the immune cell profiles of children versus adults. The full study is actually very extensive, and we really won't be able to go through all of the tables and the figures. What we will do is focus on the proposed mechanisms of children's apparent resistance to severe COVID 19 based on what they found in their study. Take note, though, that this does not mean that children are immune to COVID 19, nor does it mean that children will not get severe COVID. It just means that compared to adults, there are relatively fewer children who get severe disease or who die from COVID. The study actually proposes multiple possible mechanisms for children's apparent resistance to severe COVID. Remember that SARS-CoV-2 needs to replicate first in the nose and throat before it can progress into the lungs. The study found out that in children, the lining of their airways, including the nose, throat, and lungs, are already primed to produce interferon. Interferons are molecules normally produced by the body to counteract viruses and other diseases like some cancers. Several studies have also pointed out that SARS-CoV-2 is susceptible to type 1 interferon. And since children are more ready to produce interferon during the early stages of infection, primarily in the nose and throat, children are able to clear most of the virus before it can establish a base of operations, preventing severe systemic infections. In severe COVID disease, systemic inflammation, mainly by hyperactivity of the immune cells such as T lymphocytes and neutrophils, they play a major role in disease pathophysiology. In children, the study found that their blood has reduced cytotoxic response and that their blood contains more naive T cells and less natural killer cells compared with adults. To quote from the study, not only do children have a more naive and reduced cytotoxic response to COVID 19, they also start off with an immune state that is already skewed towards this response. Unquote. As people grow older, their immune system matures from a jack of all trades to a specialist based on their previous life experiences. Much like what happens with us as we grow older, I hope. But when your immune system gets more specialized, it gets not so flexible in dealing with new threats such as COVID. So the study hypothesized that being young, children's immune systems have more unique T and B cell receptors capable of detecting new pathogens in more ways. Lastly, the study found greater numbers of novel activated cytotoxic cells in the blood of adults compared to children. The findings suggest that interferon stimulated natural killer B and T cells are more abundant in the blood of adult COVID patients compared to children, even weeks after the start of their symptoms. The relative lack of these activated inflammatory cells in children's blood during the course of the disease suggests lesser chances of a hyperactive systemic inflammation, which again is a highlight of severe COVID disease. I really can't comment too much on the limitations of the study, as admittedly, my molecular biology knowledge is already outdated. And this study is really, really extensive in the immunology profiling part. But I would love to see if all these benchtop findings actually translate to clinical and epidemiologic data. Some of the studies that they referenced were actually limited to those done in the UK or in China. And actually, even this study used a UK or a Chicago cohort. I'm curious to know if these findings are also consistent with other demographics, as of course, I am not from UK or from Chicago. To summarize the study in one line, children seem more capable of resisting severe COVID 19 infections compared to adults, and this can be due to cellular adaptations in their immune system profile and eventual response against COVID 19.